Today's presenter will be Gus Cicala, President and CEO of Project Assistance. I'd like to introduce him now. He's the founder of Project Assistance. In 1996, he started the company to help companies achieve better, faster, more cost-effective project-based results. Gus is a recognized portfolio and project management expert who has published many popular articles and books on the subject and is frequently asked to present on topics of interest surrounding project management. Gus?
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, everybody, for attending our webinar today. We have a pretty large crowd today, so thanks to everybody who came to join us. And I'd like to start off our webinar just going through a brief agenda review. And the first thing we're going to talk about is project managers as drivers of change. And we've seen a real movement, a real recognition of this concept in our experience with working with customers who are taking it up a notch, taking it up above the 10,000-foot view, above the projects, up to the portfolio view. And you'll see as we talk about that, sharing some of that experience that we've had in that transformation of not only tending to the execution of projects, but also how project managers are connected to the strategy and vision of the organization. We're going to talk about leadership and project management. We'll do some comparisons between leadership and project management. This is a hot topic for us. There's a pretty good book that came out from David Barrett. David's the leader of Project Times, if you're familiar with that. He's also the leader of the Project Summit and the BA Summit that happens on a national scale. And David put together a book called The Keys to Our Success. And I had the honor of writing a chapter around leadership and project management. And this whole topic of the workshop today and even the one-day version of this are really predicated on these concepts and around the project manager's paradox. We'll get into these defining moments for leadership, and these four hot spots, if you will, are the culmination of 20 years of the School of Hard Knocks, working through our customers and seeing where these defining moments happen and where projects succeed and fail around how these particular points of resistance are handled. And we'll leave some time at the end for some questions and answers and a summary. If you have questions during the presentation, we may try to answer them. If I can pause and get the question and get an answer for you. But really, as we talk about project managers as drivers of change, there's this perspective that we have as an organization that says, we're on a mission. As an organization, we're on a mission, and the real question is, why do we exist? And as a project management consulting company, we can say we exist, to make the world a safer place for project management, if you will, right? I'm a volunteer with a nonprofit, and boy, they really have some really fun missions in nonprofits. A lot of sort of life-saving missions. If you look at what's happening with down in the Philippines and a lot of the nonprofits there, why do they exist? To go in and save people's lives. And so the mission of the organization is very important, and closely related to that is our values, our morality system, if you will, as an organization. Our business conduct guidelines is what we called it when I was at IBM, and it gave us that sort of parental guidance, that right and wrong, and what's right and wrong for our business, and what's right and wrong in terms of how we treat our customers and our competitors and our employees. And from that, we think about the next 3 to 5 years of vision. And when we think about the statements that are made in a vision statement and how that turns into a strategy, this idea of, I call it the lighthouse in the harbor, that point that the leadership is pointing us to, that what we want to be somewhere down the road. We exist for a reason, but there's some specific landing points we try to get to, and ultimately those landing points are cast in what we call a strategy. And I heard a simple definition a long time ago, which first made my head hurt because it was almost too simple, and I'm very good at complicating things. But it was this concept that a strategy is a plan for change, that we were going to get from where we are today to that vision, to that lighthouse out on the horizon by executing change. And therefore, when we get to the execution, this delivery of change really boils down to the job of the project manager. So when we think about that vessel that carries us to that lighthouse, that guidance that we're moving towards, the vision delivery vessel really becomes the project, right? So I always picture a portfolio as a fleet of ships traveling towards on a mission to carry the organization to the future. So yeah, it's important. I mean, if our project managers don't succeed, if we don't execute well, we're not going to change. We're not going to evolve. We're not going to get to that vision, and we're not going to achieve our mission. So I think it's really great for us project managers to pat ourselves on the back that we carry those necessary changes of this organization out to the horizon, out to that vision. And against that backdrop, let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about how project management and leadership are different, and how leadership really comes from the project manager. And it says here, this quote: even if you're on the right track, you're going to get run over if you just sit there, right? So let's talk about what it means to not just sit there. And this quote of today for our webinar, this leadership is taken and not given, comes from a historic event that I witnessed in 1981 when this gentleman stepped up on the podium, and I have what I call his second most famous quote. This gentleman, you may know, was the Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan. This day in March of 1981 was when John Hinckley attempted assassination on the president. And when somebody attempts assassination on the president, it causes quite some chaos at the senior levels of government. There was a lot of information held back from the press. There was a lot of question about the constitutional transition of power when the president was incapacitated, was in surgery, was unable to lead the nation. As a matter of fact, when they asked this gentleman, whose name is Alexander Haig, who's in charge here, he said, constitutionally, gentlemen, what you have here is the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of State in that order. And and if you think about what was happening back then, if we were to summarize the domestic policies of Ronald Reagan, there's a name for that includes his name, which was Reaganomics. But I want to talk about the foreign policy for a second. And most of you can finish this sentence. If I had a Ronald Reagan quote and I started with the words, Mr. Gorbachev, he said this in Berlin in front of a famous edifice, and the way we finish that sentence is tear down this wall. So Reagan had laid down the gauntlet. As a matter of fact, the message to the Soviets was pretty strong. When you think about what Alexander Haig's role was just prior to becoming the Secretary of State, his title was Supreme Commander. He was a general. He was the Supreme Commander of NATO, which was really invented to stem the red tide after World War II, to stop communism from entering the democracies of Western Europe. So that's the backdrop of this lesson we want to start the day with, about how leadership is taken and not given. And I call this, in the project management world, doing the Al Haig thing. And just for a little bit of fun, before I go to the video, and hopefully this video will work for you. We've tested it. People have said it works. It might be a little choppy, but we've got a high bandwidth connection, so it should play just fine. But before we play the video, I've got a poll I'd like to put up on the screen. And we're going to ask you a question of who is between the Vice President and the Secretary of State in the presidential line of succession. What does the U.S. Constitution say? So you should see that poll on your screen, I hope. Okay, I'm going to go back to Manage Polls. I have to hit launch. Thank you. So if you could select one of the answers. So far we've got, somebody has picked at least one of the answers. We've been going for 30 seconds. I'm going to give it another 7 seconds here. So I'm going to display the results. if I know how. Attendees are viewing your poll in progress. Your poll answers have been submitted. So once I close the poll, we'll see the answers. And we will share the answer. So let's see, 13% said Senate Majority Leader, 45% said Speaker of the House. That's a good guess. Secretary of Defense, then the Speaker of the House, Speaker of the House, President Pro Tem, and no one. Al was right. Yeah, and Al was not right. I can certainly see why you might think that. You might think when the Secretary of State stands up in front of the nation and says that I'm in charge here now, that it might be true. The Speaker of the House is a very good guess. He's next. He or she is next. Another trivia question might be, who was the Speaker of the House at this time? And it was Tip O'Neill, the Democratic representative from Massachusetts. The correct answer is actually the Speaker of the House and then the President Pro Tem of the Senate. So Al Haig was fifth in line. And, so the question is this defining moment in Al Haig's career was, why did he do that? Why did he think that was appropriate? Boy, everybody thought that was pretty darn inappropriate. Why would you do such a thing? And when I show you this video, you're going to hear him talking about, or actually Susan King at the White House talking about the fact that Dick Allen and David Gergen are the only people who have assembled for the Situation Room. Crisis management is in effect. The president's been shot. The vice president is not visible. He's doing what a good Bush does, coming back from a party at the Bush compound down in Texas. Okay, he's not visible. The president's clearly not visible. He's incapacitated. Nobody's at the White House. The president pro tem, the speaker, nobody's around. And by the way, Frank Reynolds is pretty unhappy about the fact that they had it wrong for a pretty long time. So the first thing I'm going to show you is Frank Reynolds with his buddy Sam Donaldson and his high school hair, getting a message after he's been reporting that the president has not been hit. You're going to hear him say the president has been hit. And Frank's not too happy about that because that's not what his support team was telling him.
Hair or light hair, he's going to look at him and but he is seized as the suspect. The next word that we're waiting for, the condition of those who were hit during this obviously attempted assassination of the president. That did not occur. Mr. Reagan was not hit. He was bounced around as the Secret Service agent.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to resume Frank now that you're seeing the video.
Maneuvered or flung, I think is probably the word. Flung him into the car to get him out of there. The president then went to the George Washington University Hospital, where those who were hit were taken. They include Jim Brady, who is the president's press secretary, a Secret Service agent, and a policeman. We do not know their condition, but quite obviously, as soon as we find out anything more, we're going to... Here we have a report that Lynn Notziger, who was the president's advisor for political affairs, Lynn Notziger told reporters at the hospital that the president was not wounded. He was wounded. God. The president was hit. He is in stable condition. All this information, the president was hit. He was hit in the left chest, according to this, but he is in stable condition. And the typed information I have is that he is okay. Speak up. The president was hit. My God, the president was hit. All this that we've been telling you is incorrect. We now must redraw this entire tragedy in different terms. The president was hit today. He was hit in the left chest, but we are told he is all right. He is at George Washington University Hospital.
Okay, so what happens is I'm going to move forward 6 minutes, and what's happened during these next 6 minutes is they've decided they're going to have reports coming instead of from the White House, from the hospital, because that's where the president is, and so they're trying to get some sort of a formal source of information flow. But while they're saying that, they suddenly cut back to the White House to Al Haig and his defining moment for leadership.
lung has collapsed, we are told. The president, however, is going to be undergoing surgery, is ready to go into surgery now. But as they're saying, they're being very careful here at the White House not to give too much information. They want it to be centrally located at the hospital itself because it's closer. Of course, the Situation Room here, which deals with all crises, is now in operation. Dick Allen, the National Security Council person, is there right now, as well as Dave Gergen, who is the, I guess, highest-ranking spokesman for the White House at this moment. Frank?
We've had late word that the president is undergoing surgery for the removal of the bullet that struck him on the left side. It entered under his arm, according to... let's go back to the White House.
Associated with today's tragedy. First, as you know, we're in close touch with the Vice President, who is returning to Washington. We have in the Situation Room all of the officials of the Cabinet who should be here and ready.
So if you look at Al's demeanor here, he's trying to say cool, but he's not. You heard Frank Reynolds say he was flung into the limousine. Okay? At that moment, the president was separated from something known as the football. That shadowy figure that's next to the president all the time. You probably never even noticed him or her carrying a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist that contained, God forbid, the nuclear launch codes for World War III. The president was separated from that. We didn't know if the Soviets possibly were behind this attack on the president. It might have been a moment when we had to start a nuclear war. And you're going to hear Al talking about we're talking to our allies. There's no cause for concern. And there's lots of cause for concern right now. So let's watch and see how he handles this. And we'll go back to Al.
First, as you know, we're in close touch with the Vice President, who is returning to Washington. We have in the Situation Room all of the officials of the Cabinet who should be here and ready at this time. We have informed our friends abroad of the situation, the President's condition as we know it, stable, now undergoing surgery, and there are absolutely no alert measures that are necessary at this time or contemplated. Now, if you have some questions, I'd be happy to take them. Crisis management is in effect.
Who is making the decisions for the government right now? Who's making the decisions?
Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of State in that order. And should the President decide he wants to transfer the helm to the Vice President, he will do so. As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the Vice President, and in close touch with him.
I want to go now to...
My hero. So I call that doing the Al Haig thing, and I like to spend some time on that at the beginning of this webinar because I think it highlights the importance, you know, in a crisis, in the chaos that happens during real life. Leaderships do emerge by taking leadership sometimes. I mean, yeah, followership, you got to earn respect and all those other things. But at the end of the day, it sort of didn't matter what the Constitution said to Al. Al said, "My God, we may have a serious threat on our doorstep. We have no visible president, no visible vice president." I have a feeling he didn't care where Tip O'Neill was, and maybe he should have. But I mean, the bottom line was, he stood up to the mic and did what I call doing the Al Haig thing, which I think is important on projects. And we have that opportunity, and we'll talk about that as one of our defining moments. Because our paradox is we have this, we're responsible for the outcome, but we don't have tangible controls, right? We have this responsibility without authority, and how do we handle that, right? We have an organization that's sort of anti-authority, right? We've got this matrixed organization, and it's difficult to be in control. If I had another polling question here's what I would ask: what percentage of the people who are on your project, if you're the project manager, what percentage of the resources have your task as their primary responsibility? And the answer is not very good. I get typical answers of greater than 50% or greater than 75% of my resources are distracted by other priorities that they consider higher than doing my project. So how do we deal with this leadership paradox where the authority is maybe not as clear as we'd like it to be. There's not a coronation, if you will. There's not a constitutional amendment that says how power will be transferred to the project manager. And so, this is, back to my early days, this is a transformation I've been through from an afro and a white tuxedo back in the 70s to today, where, back then it was all about, the technicality of the project, and it was about the technicality of the project management processes of filling out a schedule and setting a baseline and collecting actuals and doing the project management things. But what I really want to talk about for the next 30 minutes or so is, what about these separate, these skills that separate effective managers from effective leaders, right? How do we buff over those rough spots in the projects, right? How do we address these predictable points of resistance, these defining moments, predictable, right? And we'll talk about these predictable moments now. What are they? So when we think about defining moments, we're going to talk about the definition of the project as a defining moment, the initiation, the execution, and the closeout. And these are all things we can test on, okay, just like I did when I got my certification at IBM as a project manager. I could test on the process of initiation and definition. I could test on what it meant to be doing monitoring and control of a project, and what the closeout process was. But the question was, what was I going to do when I got resistance, and some of the predictable resistance we're going to talk about, and how do we overcome that? Okay, so one of my favorite quotes, because of my ability to make anything complex, it comes from Albert Einstein. Any intelligent fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. It can be simple to understand where these rough spots are, and to have that shot in my bag, and to be able to take that and pull out the right club and make that shot, if you will, when it's time to make it. There's another quote that this reminds me of, and that is, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time, right? And what's it talking about? It's talking about simplicity can take time, right? How can we simplify this whole process? So a familiar example when we think about how a project gets birthed, how a project gets defined, if we think about our fearless leader of the iPhone revolution, we had, Steve Jobs, a visionary with a vision. Yeah, there was a vision of conquering the globe, right? A plan for change that says we're going to have an innovative portfolio. We're going to have the right set of projects, the right set of computers, the right set of music devices, the right set of applications to go out there and seize the high ground. So this idea of the portfolio is getting the right projects done. But then the question is, how do we get them done right? How do we take those defining moments and ensure that we're successful through the execution of leadership and delivering that future, that vision, that lighthouse in the harbor that we're looking to? So let's talk about that for a second. And when we think about the birth of a project, when we think about the right project, we think about the definition of a right project, I like to ask people, think about your house. Think about a project in your house. Think about an add-on to an addition, a brand new kitchen renovation, an addition of a bathroom, anything like that. If we had 10 bids from 10 contractors and I said to you, pick the right bid out of there, what would you like it to be? You'd probably come up with some pretty good answers around what the right projects are. You'd probably say things like, well, I don't want the deck guy to do my kitchen. I don't want the kitchen guy to do my add-on. Okay, so optimal risk. What kind of risk am I willing to take to get this project done? What's going to have the best ROI? Well, let me see. If I put a deck on, for every dollar I spend, I'm going to get 50 cents back when I sell my house. But if I do a kitchen, for every dollar I spend, I'm going to get $1.50 back. Oh, that's interesting. What's the most cost-effective? Not cheapest necessarily, right? But what's the most cost-effective way to meet the ideas of the project? How about the alignment to my taste? If we were talking about kitchens, an organization has taste, it has a strategy, it has a direction, it has a vision that it's going towards. How about ideal timing from a schedule standpoint? How about a market need? Well, what's the point? The point is these things get decided above the line, right? At the strategy and governance level, at the portfolio level, these things are proposed, selected, and ultimately they're measured and responded in a good organization. I'll talk about good parenting in a second, okay? But what's the issue? Well, the issue is I'm responsible to do it right, to deliver on time, on budget, and on spec. And that on time and that on budget definition oftentimes has already happened before I touch the project. And I call that birth defects. Okay? The birth of a project happens without my participation. If I'm the project manager, how did we know what the budget and the schedule was? And oftentimes there's high-level, rough order of magnitudes, best engineering guesses. There's a lot of different words we can use out there, but these things can be pretty soft. I had a CIO, we have a customer, a CIO of a large organization, that says, I believe every project starts red. If we have a red light, green light, yellow light, everything should be red until we prove it's green. So we've got a defining moment. We've got a disconnect oftentimes between the portfolio idea of what a right project is and what it's going to take for me to really get it done. So, you know, the project environment, the environment I live in as a project manager is like living in a family, right? The stakeholders conceive and raise the project for the business case, right? So it is predetermined. And adoption and governance is, you know, is for the kids, right? We're going to be, just like the project managers have oversight on the team members, we've got that portfolio team, that governance team, those steering committees telling us what the right and wrong moves are as the project manager. So in a supportive environment where we have a good value system, where we give the project managers the opportunity to speak up, the project managers are more likely to succeed, but that doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes we're in this position where we have to stand up and do the Al Haig thing and say, hey, look, you know, I'm looking at this project, I'm looking at the schedule, I'm looking at the budget, we've done some validation, and this thing's not going to fit. You can't fit a 6-month project into a 3-month budget. You can't fit $1 million project into a $500,000 budget. How are we going to stand up and do something about this? Or, since I call it bad parenting or birth defects, in this case, in an organization, we kind of can change our parents, can't we? You can only get fired once, or you can only leave your job once, but I mean, there's a question of, are we in an environment where we can have leadership, where we're given the opportunity to stand up, to defend, or to change the budget, the schedule, the scope, based on the reality of what we're learning as we go through initiation? Okay? Because the price of being reactive is very high. And a lot of you have seen this, right? I mean, if we fix something at the definition point, it might cost us $1, but we have a logarithmic scale. If it comes up in requirements, it turns into $10, design 100, detailed design 1,000, building, testing, definition, live. You know, we get prohibitive, right? The longer we wait to deal with this, the more problematic it becomes. So we get into this question of, you know, fighting human nature. If we think about what human nature really does one of two things. In normal human nature, we seek pleasure or avoid pain. But if you're a project manager, you get to do it different. You get to seek pain early, right? So what do we mean by that? Well, expectation management is different than human nature, right? So if we're planning well, if we're having problems, if we're talking about risk of a project not meeting its schedule, not meeting its budget, okay, it's an unpopular subject, right? So, you know, there's an unnatural skill to be a soft leader, to stand up at that birthing of the project. And I always picture this beautiful maiden voyage of this brand new yacht, you know, and the Mozart's playing in the background from the local orchestra, and you've got the evening gowns, and you've got the tuxedos, and you've got the fine champagne being cracked over the bow, and here comes the project manager who opens his mouth, and it sounds like the proverbial nails going down the blackboard, or the phonograph needle being scratched across the LP. Stop the music, and let us find out if we have the right fuel, and if there's rocks in the harbor, and if we thought about icebergs, and have the inspections been done, is the insurance up to snuff, and all those things we have to do as a leader to stand up and take charge. Predictable point of resistance, number 2, is project initiation, and this is certainly my favorite. And I love this quote from Voltaire, common sense is not so common. I put this here because the first time I learned formal project management, like many of you, I had already been managing projects for a while. I learned it through the School of Hard Knocks. So when I had formal training, I had 2 discoveries. One was project management had a lot of common sense, and I started calling it structured common sense. There were a lot of things I had done on my own without reading a project management book or going to a project management class that I had gotten right because I used common sense. But what I also found was there were several things I could have been doing and maybe should have been doing, but I didn't know how to do and was never taught how to do because it didn't come to me as common sense. And this next example I want to talk about is a great defining moment, and I want to introduce this defining moment with a video I really like. This is Djokovic talking about a match point that he got in Wimbledon a few years back. But I love him talking about how long he practiced this shot. It should have been a predictable moment. This was a defining moment in his career, and it was a predictable moment, and boy, did he execute well.
I have to say that's one of the best shots I ever hit in my life. Under the circumstances, it looked like an impossible shot. You rely on your confidence, on self-belief, on your anticipation, on your hand-eye coordination, and all of that comes as a result of the work. Funny thing is that at the age of 9, 10, 11, 12, we used to practice those short angles, those short cross courts. I met just a couple of days ago with my first coach, Jelena Gencic. She goes like, I don't see the reason why you have to be surprised with that shot when we practiced it that much. When I was 7.5, she told me that one day I can be the best player in the world. It's the semifinals of a Grand Slam. It's a fifth set. I came a long way to come back into the match. I don't want to let this go that easily. I'm playing one of my biggest rivals, Roger Federer. He made a crucial break. He was match points up. Crowd starts making more noise. So even if you don't want to look at the scoreboard and think about the score, the crowd reminds you of where you are and what's the stage of the match. So for that certain points, you work all your life and you live for them, you know. I anticipated well. I ready to serve. And then I felt that I was in the perfect balance to hit that ball in that way. Before I made the contact, I knew that return will be very good. When I made the contact, I knew that it will be a winner. The angle that I hit.
Yeah, so he said, you prepare for that moment for your whole life, and I knew when I hit that shot it was going to be a very good one. I want to talk about my favorite shot in project management execution and this opportunity for leadership, and it's about the plan, right? When I ask this question to a group of project managers in an interactive workshop, we do this as an interactive presentation in an 8-hour sort of format, and I ask the question, what is that first public defining moment when you can do the Al Haig thing? It's predictable. When can you stand up and say, as of now, I'm in control of the project? And for most of us, we would probably say the kickoff, right? We've got the stakeholders there. We've got the team members there. There's a lot of people who haven't met each other yet. It's it can be somewhat of a tense moment. There can be people that don't even know why this project is happening because they weren't involved in the birthing, in the definition, in the business plan, that whole business, right? So we got this thing called the plan, right? If we visualize the plan, it's a set of connected plans, right? The training plans, the communication, deployment, all those things you see on the screen. But what I want to talk about is really this plan here, which is when we talk about how we're going to be successful in the project, we're talking about the definition of success, really, right? The classic definition, on time, on budget, on spec, or on scope, is really what we're talking about. And here's the sort of the other sort of nails going down the blackboard, if you will, just like it was with the launch of the project when we received it from the portfolio, the definition, and now we're going out to talk about the reality of how I'm going to run the project, how we're going to run the project, how my leadership and authority will be utilized to define success. If I talk about scope, okay, and I talk about its impact, then I'm going to see some reactions. Okay, if I talk about scope and I say, gee, when there's a scope change, something's going to get impacted. It's going to be probably an increase in time, probably an increase in budget. You say that at a kickoff, it's going to be unpopular. But let me ask a poll question to kind of get us in the mood here. Okay, so the question is, what percentage of your projects have experienced a scope change? Can we anticipate scope changes? So do they happen in real life? Before the project even starts, what percentage of your projects will experience a scope change? Got about 10 more seconds. So the results we're getting are pretty predictable, right? I don't think anybody's going to be too surprised to see that the majority said greater than 90%, 38% of the people, almost half of the 60 people we have on here are saying it's going to happen. You know, we have 38 plus 21 plus 24% saying, wow, you know, clearly the majority of projects, well over 50% of projects are going to have a scope change. So why aren't we talking about it, right? And the reason is because we're trying to be human. I'm trying not to seek pain early because this is a painful topic, right? So that defining moment is not only here when we talk about the scope change, okay, because it's not popular. And when I talk about it, what am I going to say? I'm going to say there's going to be some changes, okay? So if we look at if we go into your morgue, your project management morgue, your project post-mortem analysis is done on failed projects. You know, what would be the most common cause of death, do we think? And if we look at what kills projects, you know, we can predict this. It's before a project even starts. Okay, so if a project management coordinator performed a post-mortem on your organization's failed projects, what would be the most common cause of death? And I don't know, you decide. Pretty interesting results so far. Well, we must have a lot of real project managers. Like, nobody took the trick question. So 66% voted, 70% have voted, 71. Guess we're not going to get above 2/3, 3/4. We done? What are you pointing at? Oh, thank you. Okay. And here's the story. Unrealistic schedule. Well, how do schedules get unrealistic? Sometimes they start that way. Sometimes they happen through scope creep, right? So I'm gonna take a blind leap of faith, and I'm gonna lump together 1 and 4. Unrealistic schedules usually happen, and oh, by the way, unrealistic schedules oftentimes don't kill a project, right? They just make them late, right? So if we said what really kills them, lack of sponsor support, and the unrealistic schedules eventually kill it, but oftentimes it's a combination of scope creep. And so this scope question is important, right? So let's talk about this defining moment just a little bit more. If I go into the kickoff and I talk about the triple threat, the triple constraint, okay, at the kickoff, and we talk about a scope increase, really what we're saying is if the majority of my projects are going to have a scope change, that means the majority of my projects are going to need an impact analysis. That means I'm going to have to budget and schedule for it. I can't schedule an impact analysis. It's disruptive. It uses my key people, not just the project manager, my technicians, my engineers, right? The folks that are making the stuff in the project, the scientists, whoever they are, right? So we can budget for impact analysis and small changes. And yeah, we charge for estimates. That's unpopular. That's another defining moment. Are we ready for that predictable point of resistance that says, we're not going to have change? Why are you bringing this stuff up? Change is unpopular. We're not going to do it. Or if we are going to do it, we're not going to let you change the estimate for the schedule or the budget. And really that first time we get that first change order in, that first project change request, I call it the hand grenade, right? Because there's sort of a predictable explosion. There's negativity. There's, oh, you're nickel and diming me. It's only a small change. Why are we having to change the schedule? Come on, just slip it in. And what I have found out from a defining moment standpoint is we put our foot down and we say no. We're not going to keep the schedule constant. We're not going to keep the budget constant. What I found out is the second change order is a walk in the park. But we still have to follow the process. And the other but on this is I may give that first one away if I have a budget for small changes. I can say I have an impact analysis budget, and within that budget I put aside 20 hours for small changes. So when you bring a small one, I'm not going to nickel and dime you to death. But when you get to that 21st hour, we're going to start charging for it. And the charge is going to be an impact to the schedule and the budget. Okay, so that's kind of the one that I think, needs some talking about, and it's painful to bring it up, and it's painful to say no, and it's painful to take the risk of the loss of client satisfaction when we say no, we're not going to do this one for free. But it's a decision we have to make, and we have to make effective trade-offs, right? There's this gray area we're operating in where we're compromising all the time. We're compromising client sat for what? To put our foot down and to hold the change, right? So compromises, when they're done right, in the project world, usually leave both sides a little bit dissatisfied, right? And that's kind of the queasiness we get to have in our stomach, that gray area we're operating in all the time. And of course, I love the inadequate testing. I mean, the hidden leak on this scope change thing is quality, right? Because oftentimes we say, okay, we'll take on the scope change, we won't move the budget, we won't move the schedule. Well, guess what gets moved? What got moved in Obamacare? What's the postmortem finding on that? There wasn't enough time to test the key functions. Why not? Because we had to be up and live October 1st. We weren't done developing yet. Of course, we weren't going to test everything, right? Quality, right? Probably improper training, improper documentation, improper testing. They're the things that kill the end of a project. Okay, let's move on to defining moment number 3, I mean. The bad news is time flies. The good news is that you're the pilot. And this is a quote from the Harvard Business Review, the execution trap. This idea that when the project starts, we've got to have a defining moment to say, are we going to follow the plan? Do we have a plan? Do we have a definition, a scope, a charter? And are we going to follow it, right? So it says if you run a Google search for a mediocre strategy, well executed is better than a great strategy, poorly executed, you will get more than 42,600 references from the famous ancient Chinese general 2,500 years ago who wrote The Art of War, saying that execution trumps everything. We've got to be good at execution. So all that planning that we love as project managers, is wasted if we're not going to put our foot down and insist that execution be done well. And this is my favorite example of execution. Susan Boyle, you've probably seen this. I'm only going to play the first minute. I'd like to play the whole thing, but we don't have time for it. So I'd like to watch her sing this thing right to the end. But you're going to hear her talk about her defining moment. Well, if you thought you could sing as well as Ellen Page, how come you haven't done it yet? You're 47 years old. How come you haven't done it yet? She said, well, I haven't had the chance. This is my chance. So when we get our chance, we got to sing, right? Villages.
And how old are you, Susan? I am 47. And that's just one side of me. Okay, what's the dream? I'm trying to get the professional thing. And why hasn't it worked out so far, Susan? I'm not going to give it a chance before here's hoping it will change. Okay, and who would you like to be as successful as? Elaine Page. Elaine Page. What are you going to sing tonight? I'm going to sing I Dream the Dream from the Last.
Okay. Think so? Yeah? Yes.
I dreamed a dream in time gone by.
You didn't expect that, did you? Did you? No.
I dreamed that love would never die. I dreamed that God would be forgiven. I was young and unafraid. When dreams are made and used and wasted, and all the ones will be paid.
Okay, so if you probably weren't doing the math there, but if you look at from the time they were laughing at her and she sung her first note, it's about 20 seconds before she's getting a standing ovation. And just a couple of just quick facts about Susan Magdalene Boyle, born in 1961, a Scottish singer who came to international public attention when she appeared as a contestant on the TV program Britain's Got Talent, 11th of April 2009. Now, in that same year, Boyle's debut album, I Dreamed a Dream, in 2009, instantly became the UK's best-selling debut album of all time, beating the previous record held by, who cares? It's Spirit, but fill in your favorite, Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, The Who, The Beatles. I mean, you know, this is Susan Boyle's legacy. Boyle's net worth was estimated at £22 million in April of 2012. That's execution, right? And she planned for it. It took her 47 years, and sometimes it feels like that in a project plan. Gets us 47 years before we get to execute. So, you know, how does a large software project get to be 1 year late? And the answer is one day at a time, right? So how does this happen? And I'd like to talk about the definition of control. When I was at IBM in the late 80s and early 90s, they had an objective definition. Either you were or you weren't doing control activities, right? So our defining moment is, you know, are we going to drive the fact that we are going to do these things? You're keeping our balls keeping our balls off our side of the net, right? We don't owe people anything. Okay, the action list don't have my name up and down the action list. Holding the execution processes to a regular cyclical basis, probably weekly. What do we mean by execution processes? The regular collection of actuals, cost, labor, schedule, the comparison of to baseline, the driving of incremental completion. Done doesn't happen at the end of the project. Done happens in increments throughout the project. And we'll talk about that defining moment in a minute. But you know, analyzing variances against the baseline, revising the plan, doing change management. Either we are or we're not doing this. And if we're not doing it, by definition, by objective definition, we're out of control, right? So what does that mean? Well, can I be in control and deliver on time, on budget? Or I'm sorry, deliver over budget and late? And according to that definition, the answer is yes. I can be in control. I can be doing those things, but I can be given bad news. How about the opposite? Can I be out of control and deliver on time and on budget? And the answer is yes. I call this raised by wolves, right? Somebody else steps up. Somebody takes leadership. Sometimes it's called the inmates running the asylum. But sometimes projects like that finish despite the lack of leadership. Which one would I rather be on? Which one has the greatest amount of risk? I think we know the answer there, right? So as an objective measure, having control gives us the best chance of managing that risk, right? If we're out of control, right, the project is succeeding in spite of us. We probably have a BA that stepped up. We probably have a solution architect that stepped up. We have somebody that stepped up. God forbid we have the business sponsor that stepped up. Sometimes that works, but oftentimes it's not what we really would rather have. Okay, so really this idea of establishing cadence and tempo is something we have to step up and do. I find that doing the control activities that I control the tempo of the game. If you know anything about sports and controlling the tempo of the game, if we have any Eagles fans on, we know something about controlling the tempo of the game. And what Chip Kelly did when he was at the University of Oregon was really controlling the tempo of the game. Okay, so just a quick poll here. So are you given time to establish control in your projects? Nobody wants to answer that one. There, we got one answer. Okay, about 10 more seconds. So the majority falls sort of about where I would have expected, what we've seen before, right? So the dominant, the greater than 50% is the first two, barely enough time. We're collecting labor actuals on a sporadic basis. So you know, if we're not given the time to do this, how are we supposed to be in control is the question, and that's the defining moment, right? What are we going to do about it? Are we going to demand additional help? Are we going to refuse to take the project on? I mean, this is a big issue, right? That we have this challenge. So And, you know, and to have incremental close, you know, this next defining moment is really highly reliant on being able to establish this cadence and tempo. So we've got some challenges out there. So if the train leaves the station, we realize the bridge is out, what are we going to do? Right? And in most organizations, if I say, even when that project's going wrong and we know things are out of control and we know the budget has been exceeded and we know the schedule can't be met, will you stop the train? And the answer is no, we call it a beach day. And, you know, we should have canceled the itinerary, but the train goes off the tracks, unfortunately, right? That's usually the scope creep thing that gets us there. Okay, so the final couple points here before we turn this over for some questions. It's human to prefer to go through denial, right? So oftentimes we get stuck in this execution trap because we go through the 5 stages of grief. And if we don't have good execution at a governance level, my project manager will continue to be in denial, okay? So if we're proactive, we revise the plan. If we're reactive, we miss the deal. So finally, defining moment number 4, it says, all endeavor calls for an ability to tramp the last mile, shape the last plan, endure the last hour's toil. The fight to the finish spirit is the one characteristic we must possess if we're to face the future as finishers. Okay, so let's talk about closing. So the challenges we have is, you know, completion criteria. Have we defined a scope, and as part of that scope, a clear definition of the task, the approach, the deliverables, the completion criteria, the sign-offs, the acceptance, whatever you want to call those things, right? Have we done that effectively throughout the project? Sometimes you've delivered what you think you promised, but the customer doesn't get what they think they bought, okay? So that disconnect is not something we should find out at the end. You know, what am I doing to stand up and take control and do the out-tag thing with my leadership to make sure control is happening on an incremental basis? How are we doing follow-up on out-of-scope activities? Have we pushed them to the end? Have we tracked them? If we're doing a great job with scope management, some things even the customer will volunteer to put out a scope until the end of the project, right? How about the handoff to the stakeholders? And ultimately, this final challenge we have here is all the challenges from the earlier stages are going to snowball when we get to this point, right? If we haven't done a good job, this is where we find extreme difficulty closing out the project. Okay, so I want to just show a brief video of this gentleman talking about the difference between leadership and management, and I'm going to let you think about whether we're project managers or project leaders based on what we're just about to hear.
Hey, I'd like to welcome everyone. My name is Scott Williams, and I want to take a few moments to talk to you today about how it is that I manage my staff. Let me tell you, the simple answer to how I manage my staff is this. I don't. I don't manage my staff. I lead my staff. You know, there's been this ongoing debate, ongoing argument over managers versus leaders and what particular category that people may fall into. And so I'll tell you, after reading countless books and being in a number of different leadership roles in both nonprofit organizations, corporations, and worked in politics and in ministry, I'm telling you, I've definitely witnessed the difference between the two. And I had the opportunity as a young leader to work for,
Okay, so he worked for a great person that taught him what he's about to say. And so I'm going to fast forward through these 10 points. Fast forward to these 10 points, not through them.
And what we have to understand is that the business of following is voluntary. It's a voluntary action. A lot of times managers don't even realize this. And so the challenge for most managers, they don't realize that they're managing. They're confusing managing with leadership. And so I'm going to help us to look at these 10 simple category principles and category comparisons that will compare the difference between a manager and a leader. And so the first thing, when it comes to essence, the essence of all of this, managers, they're all about stability. Where a leader, on the other hand, they're all about change. You know, when it comes to rules, managers make the rules, leaders, they break the rules, you know, for the sake of their organization, for the sake of what they're leading. When it comes to approach, you know, it's all about, for managers, all about planning the details. Where a leader, it's about setting the direction. This is where we're going. And when it comes to culture, managers, they execute. And where leaders, they shape the culture. When it comes to conflict, managers oftentimes avoid conflict. Where leaders, they use conflict as an asset because they understand that there's no movement without friction. When it comes to direction, managers like to go down the existing road. I'm going to go this way. This is comfortable. Where leaders, they like to go down new roads. When it comes to credit, managers tend to take credit, where leaders, they give credit to all those around, those who are making it happen. When it comes to decisions, managers makes the decisions, where leaders would generally facilitate the decision. They will encourage and create buy-in in a healthy way. When it comes to vision, managers tell, and leaders, they sell. They sell the vision and direction. And this one is really important, the last one, number 10. When it comes to style, managers are generally transactional. What are the transactions to get this from there? Where leaders, it's about being transformational, transforming people, transforming an organization, transforming a culture.
So, in summary, we have 4 defining moments. We have that definition point coming out of the portfolio. We have the initiation point where we do the kickoff and we do the Al Haig thing and say, I'm on control here at the project, and here's how we're going to run it. Here's how we're going to do scope change, execution, difficult, rough patch. A lot of you acknowledge that today. A majority said that's a tough spot. And the closeout, how do we get that ball across the finish line? By doing a series of first downs, not hoping for the Hail Mary pass, if you will. So I'm going to show you a couple links that you can go to for some additional information, including this one-day workshop that we do. We do this for a full day. It's available at our site if you want more information. We do best practice tools and guidelines. We give you the techniques to transform project managers into leaders. We'll do some hands-on exercises around some of the predictable points of resistance, some role-playing, real-world scenarios, some additional multimedia presentations, interactive discussions, and not surprisingly, we start with that 50,000-foot view and separate the leadership from the management, and then work through each of these defining moments. They're customizable. There's probably 35 of them if we really sat down and cataloged them all and see what's going to be in that book coming out on that topic. Okay. Our website, these are the solutions we get into. We do project work with Microsoft. We do upfront assessments. We've got a distribution tool for methodologies. We've got a book we just released on Project 2013. #1 seller in category. If you go on Amazon for Project 2013 training, you should see this come up as #1. We've got an automation tool for methods and tools, and we've got some contact information and a final poll as we approach 4 o'clock here, and that is here's a selection of some of the useful information that you might want to have some access to. So there's some URLs there that you can copy down. And while I'm showing this information, do we have any questions from the audience that we haven't answered? No, you were answering them privately. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to close that poll. Would love to get linked in with you. If you would send me an invitation, would love to hear from you. There's my email address. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I'm a minute late, but I'm going to show you the final video. If you want to stay for it, it's up to you. No, that's something. I paused it. Okay. We call it the fun theory. So leadership can really be fun. I hope you got something out of this today. For those of you who stayed to the end, I'm sorry I ran over by a few minutes. Thank you very much, and hope to hear from you. Take care.